It's 2:30 a.m., and the house is silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I'm sitting on the edge of the couch, staring at the clock. My partner still isn't home. At first, I tried not to overthink it. She's had late nights before. But as the hours dragged on, the worry turned into frustration. This wasn't just a one-off occurrence. It had become a pattern, and tonight felt like the final straw. I think back to the phone call earlier in the evening. It was 9 p.m. when she called. Her voice noticeably slurred. She was drunk, trying to sound affectionate, calling me baby in a tone that didn't match the situation. Her sweetness felt rehearsed, a hollow attempt to smooth over the fact that she had been out for hours without saying anything. She asked me where I was, as if I was the one who needed to explain myself. I told her I was at home, like I always was, and asked her where she was. Her response stung. She said she was out and wanted me to join her. Work had ended at 4 p.m., so by then, she had already been out for 5 hours. Her words were dismissive, like I was the unreasonable one for staying home. Then she added something that cut even deeper. If I wanted to be with her, I'd come out. I could feel my chest tighten as I answered her. If you wanted to be with me, you'd be at home. The phone call didn't end there. She rambled on for a while, her voice weaving between playful and defensive. I could tell she wasn't alone, and my mind immediately jumped to her boss. This wasn't the first time I suspected something was going on between them. The familiarity in her tone when she mentioned his name, the way she seemed to light up when talking about him, it all added up. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but what would be the point? She was drunk, and I knew she'd just deny everything. Eventually, she hung up, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The night stretched on, each hour feeling heavier than the last. I thought about all the times I had waited for her, excused her behavior, and convinced myself that things would get better. But as the clock ticked past midnight and then 1 a.m., a new feeling settled in. I was done. Done waiting, done wondering, done hoping she'd change. By the time 2:30 rolled around, I wasn't just angry. I was resolute. Something had shifted inside me. This wasn't the relationship I wanted, and I couldn't keep pretending it was. As I sat there in the quiet of the house, I knew what I needed to do. Tomorrow, I would leave. No more arguments, no more excuses. It was time to take control of my life, even if it meant walking away from someone I once loved. And with that decision made, I finally got up from the couch. There was no point in waiting any longer. I would pack my things in the morning and leave before she even had the chance to stumble through the door. The thought of seeing her didn't bring me peace or closure, just exhaustion. I wasn't sure how I'd feel when it was all done, but for now, I felt one thing clearly. I was ready to move on. Morning came quicker than I expected. The light creeping through the blinds felt invasive, a harsh reminder that reality couldn't be avoided any longer. I hadn't slept much, maybe an hour, 2 at most. My mind had been racing all night, going over every detail of what I needed to do. There was no doubt in my mind anymore. I was leaving. I got out of bed and quietly moved around the house. Everything felt different, like I was a stranger in my own space. Every corner of the home we shared seemed to mock me with memories. The couch where we used to sit and laugh, the kitchen where we cooked together. None of it felt warm anymore. It was all tainted, overshadowed by her growing distance and the choices she had made. I had already prepared for this moment in my head. The note was written, brief but clear. It wasn't about being dramatic or hurtful. I just wanted her to understand why I couldn't stay. The typed letter went into more detail, outlining everything she had done to push me away, how her behavior had eroded my trust, and how her absence had left me feeling invisible. It wasn't about assigning blame. It was about closure for me. As I started packing my things, I realized how little I actually wanted to take. Clothes, toiletries, a few personal items, that was it. The rest of it, the things we had accumulated together, didn't feel like mine anymore. They were part of a life I no longer belonged to. I folded my shirts and placed them in a suitcase, the sound of the zipper breaking the silence in the house. It was oddly satisfying, like sealing a chapter one was finally ready to leave behind. I didn't want to be here when she came home, assuming she even planned to come back this morning. I had no energy for a confrontation, no interest in hearing excuses or apologies. She'd probably try to brush it off, act like I was overreacting, or maybe even flip it around and make me feel guilty for leaving. I'd heard it all before. Half-hearted promises to change, explanations that never quite made sense. This time, I wasn't sticking around to hear it. I finished packing faster than I expected. Everything I needed fit into 2 bags. It felt strange, knowing that my entire life with her could be condensed into such a small amount of space. But that only reinforced my decision. If this relationship had been worth saving, it would have felt harder to leave. Instead, it felt like relief. Before I left, I placed the letters where she couldn't miss them, on the dining table, next to her usual seat. I stared at them for a moment, wondering if she'd even take the time to read them or if they'd just sit there, ignored like so many of my concerns over the past months. It didn't matter, though. I wasn't writing them for her approval. I was writing them for me, to say the things I had been too afraid to say out loud. With my bags in hand, I paused at the front door. It hit me that this would be the last time I walked out of this house. For a brief moment, I felt the weight of the years we'd spent together, the good times, the laughter, the love we used to share. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by the knowledge that those things were in the past. The person I had loved wasn't the same person anymore, and neither was I. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me. The cool morning air hit my face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. I wasn't entirely sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done looking back. The day dragged on like never before. Sitting at work, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept drifting back to the house, wondering if she had seen the letters yet. Had she come home? Was she still out with her boss? A million scenarios played out in my head, but none gave me any clarity. All I knew was that I felt a strange mixture of anxiety and peace. I had taken control of my life, but the confrontation I'd been dreading still loomed over me. It was late in the afternoon when my phone buzzed. It was her, Samantha. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, letting her discover everything on her own. But my curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the phone, my voice calm but distant as I answered. "Hey," she said, her tone casual, almost cheerful. "Where are you?" "Out," I replied, keeping my answers short. I wasn't in the mood to play along with whatever act she was about to put on. She paused for a moment, perhaps sensing that something was off. "Out where? When are you coming home?" Her choice of words almost made me laugh. Coming home? Did she even realize what she was saying? I took a deep breath and said, "I think you should check the dining table when you get back." "What? Why? What's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. "You'll understand when you see it," I replied, then ended the call before she could ask anything else. I wasn't ready to rehash everything over the phone. If this was going to happen, it needed to be face to face. The hours crawled by until I finally left work. My stomach churned as I drove to the house, unsure of what I'd find when I got there. I parked in the driveway and sat in the car for a moment, trying to steady my nerves. I reminded myself that I had nothing to lose. I had already made my decision, and no matter how she reacted, I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into staying. When I walked into the house, the first thing I noticed was the letters still sitting on the table, untouched. The second thing I noticed was Samantha, sitting on the couch with her phone in hand, looking up at me with a mix of confusion and irritation. "What's this all about?" she asked, pointing to the letters. Her tone was defensive, as if I had done something wrong. I dropped my bag by the door and walked over to her. "It's all in the letters," I said. "I think you should read them." She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "Why don't you just tell me? What's this dramatic stunt supposed to prove?" Her dismissive attitude lit a spark of anger in me, but I kept my composure. "This isn't a stunt, Samantha. This is me being done. I can't keep doing this, wondering where you are, who you're with, why I'm not enough for you to come home to." Her expression shifted, a flicker of guilt crossing her face before she quickly masked it with annoyance. "You're overreacting. You know I've just been out with friends. It's not a big deal." "Friends? Is that what you call your boss now?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. She looked away, her silence louder than any denial she could have given. That was all the confirmation I needed. I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. "I'm not going to argue with you," I said, turning to grab my bags. "I've made my decision, and I'm sticking to it. I deserve better than this." As I walked toward the door, she called after me. "Wait, can we just talk about this? You're blowing everything out of proportion." I stopped but didn't turn around. "No, Samantha, You had plenty of chances to talk, but your actions spoke louder than anything you could say now. With that, I walked out of the house for the last time, closing the door on a chapter of my life that I knew I'd never revisit. When I walked out of that house, it felt like I was leaving a part of myself behind. But as the door clicked shut, there was also a strange sense of liberation. The weight I'd been carrying for so long, every doubt, every suspicion, seemed to dissolve in the cool night air. My mind told me I had done the right thing, but my heart ached with the finality of it all. I drove to my family's house, where I'd arranged to stay temporarily, replaying the confrontation over and over again in my mind. The first few days were a blur. I kept my phone on silent, avoiding the inevitable flood of calls and messages from Samantha. I knew she'd try to convince me to come back, but I wasn't going to fall for her excuses again. Instead, I focused on finding some semblance of stability, working, reconnecting with friends, and leaning on my family for support. But then, the messages started coming. First, it was a simple text, "Can we talk?" I ignored it. Hours later, another one came, "You can't just leave like this." Still, I didn't respond. By the third day, the messages turned desperate. "I messed up, okay? Please, let me explain." I knew better than to give in. Every message she sent only reaffirmed why I had left in the first place. She wasn't apologizing because she truly understood the pain she'd caused. She was apologizing because she realized she'd lost control, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. Then came the social media posts. Pictures of us from happier times, paired with captions like, "I miss you," and "We were so good together." It was a calculated move, designed to make me look like the villain for leaving her. Mutual friends began reaching out, asking what had happened and why I was being so cold. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I kept my responses vague, refusing to let her twist the narrative. The breaking point came a week later when I got a call from her boss. Yes, the same boss she had been spending all those late nights with. I was caught off guard when I saw his name pop up on my phone. Hesitating for a moment, I decided to answer. His voice was calm but firm. "I think we need to talk," he said. I didn't know what to expect, but I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop the next day. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a tense expression. As I sat down, he wasted no time getting to the point. "I don't know what Samantha's been telling you," he began, "but you deserve to know the truth." My heart raced as he recounted everything. How Samantha had been lying not just to me, but to him as well. He told me about the nights she'd spent at his place, the stories she told about our relationship, and how he eventually realized she was playing both sides. "I ended things with her," he said, his tone filled with regret. "I thought you should know." Hearing it from him was like a punch to the gut. Even though I had already suspected the worst, having it confirmed made it all feel more real. But at the same time, it was oddly validating. For so long, I had questioned myself, wondering if I was overreacting or being paranoid. Now there was no doubt. I had been right all along. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of closure. Samantha had tried to keep me in the dark, but the truth had a way of coming out. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally move forward. When I got back from the meeting with Samantha's boss, I felt an odd sense of clarity. The storm that had been brewing in my life was finally starting to pass. For the first time in months, I could see the path ahead, even if it wasn't the one I had envisioned when Samantha and I first got together. That night, as I packed the last of my belongings from my family's guest room, I caught myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The lies, the betrayals, and the unraveling of a relationship I had once thought was unshakable. It was painful, yes, but it was also eye-opening. I realized how much I had been compromising my own happiness and self-respect just to hold on to something that wasn't real anymore. But then came the unexpected knock at the door. I opened it to find Samantha standing there, disheveled and teary-eyed. She must have pieced together where I was staying, or maybe one of our mutual friends had tipped her off. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cracking. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face and tell her to leave me alone. But another part, the part that still remembered the good times we had shared, told me to hear her out. I stepped aside and let her in, though I kept my distance as she stood awkwardly in the entryway. She launched into an apology, a long, rambling explanation filled with excuses about stress, poor judgment, and feeling disconnected. She admitted to the affair with her boss, but tried to downplay it, saying it didn't mean anything, and that she was confused. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. "But I love you. I don't want to lose you." Her words might have moved me once, but not anymore. I stayed quiet for a moment, letting her fill the silence with more justifications and pleas. Finally, I cut her off. "You don't love me," I said, my tone calm but firm. "If you did, you wouldn't have lied to me over and over again. You wouldn't have disrespected me like this." Her face fell, and for the first time, I saw something that resembled genuine regret. But it didn't change anything. I had made my decision long before this conversation, and no amount of apologies was going to undo the damage that had been done. "I'm done, Samantha," I continued. "You had your chances, and you made your choices. Now I'm making mine." I handed her the letter I had written earlier, the one that explained everything in detail. "Read this when you're ready. It says everything I need to say." She tried to argue, to beg me to reconsider, but I stood my ground. Eventually, she realized there was nothing more she could do. She left, tears streaming down her face, and I closed the door behind her, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. The next day, I moved into a small apartment closer to work. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and it represented a fresh start. I threw myself into rebuilding my life, focusing on my career, reconnecting with old friends, and rediscovering the things that made me happy. Looking back, I don't regret the relationship. It taught me valuable lessons about trust, self-respect, and the importance of setting boundaries. But more importantly, it taught me the strength it takes to walk away from something that no longer serves you. And as for Samantha, I don't know where she is now, and I don't need to. My focus is on moving forward, building a life I can be proud of, and never settling for anything less than what I deserve.